Okay, have you ever taken a second when you're charging your phone, working on all that homework you have overdue on your laptop, or even driving to work, to wonder where all of the energy that powers your life comes from? Well, the production of energy is a big factor in our lives, and many of us know little to nothing about it. But before we start discussing the major types of energy production, let's first define energy. So, according to EIA.com, energy is the ability to do work. So, energy comes in three major forms: heat, which is thermal energy; light, also known as radiant energy; and then motion, which is also known as kinetic energy. So there's a few different major sources of energy that's used in the United States. AmericanGeosciences.org states that the three major fossil fuels, which are petroleum, natural gas, and coal, accounted for most of the nation's energy production in 2016. So, some of the current percentages of energy that are used in the US right now are as follows: natural gas is about 33%, petroleum, which is crude oil and natural gas plant liquids, makes up about 28%, coal is 17%, renewable energy, so solar panels or windmills or wind turbines, are about 12%, and then nuclear electric power is about 10%. So now that we know some of the common statistics about energy today, let's take a look back at the basic historical trends in energy. So historically, energy consumption patterns have changed very drastically. Before electricity was even discovered or commonly available in the mid to late 1800s, many people used wood as one of the most common forms of energy today. Water mills were also common, but only to the small percentage of people who lived near a water source. They were also common for factories and early industrial growth. So then, in the late 19th century, coal was the more dominant energy source until petroleum took over in the late 1900s. Natural gas also became very popular as well. As the mid 20th century approached, coal usage again became popular, mostly for electric power generation plants. In addition, nuclear or electric power as energy has made significant growth in the industry. Later on, the use of petroleum and natural gas began to grow again, and since the late 20th century, energy usage has remained pretty stable. So now that we've discussed some of the basic historical trends of energy, let's talk about renewable and non-renewable sources. So, renewable energy sources, which are also known as clean energy, is energy that comes from natural sources or processes that are consistently replenished in nature. So, some examples of these renewable energy sources include sunlight or solar power, and then wind power, which is harnessed through windmills or wind turbines. On the other hand, non-renewable energy sources, which are also known as dirty energy, is energy that is only available in limited amounts and will either be gone for good or take a very long time to replenish, like we're talking millions of years. So a few examples of this dirty energy are fossil fuels such as oil, gas, and coal. So now that we know the difference between renewable and non-renewable energy sources, let's revisit and go into depth about some of the major energy sources used today. So first, let's discuss renewable energy. As I touched on earlier, some of the major renewable energy sources are wind and solar power. So first, solar energy comes, as you probably would have guessed, from the sun. Solar cells or photovoltaic cells are made from materials such as silicone that transfer sunlight into electricity. These can be found on the rooftops of houses or businesses to power either one house or even a whole neighborhood or city. So there are also commonly known solar farms which can generate enough power for thousands of homes. So the obvious pros of solar power are that the sun is typically shining, so solar power is easily available and clean. However, solar power does have a few cons. Solar panels can be very expensive for the average person to buy, and the manufacturing process can have some environmental impacts because they're being produced in factories that might not use renewable energy as their source of energy. However, when compared to the detrimental environmental impacts of other energy sources, solar power is not nearly as environmentally damaging. Also, finding the room for solar farms can be difficult, and many people don't like the look of solar panels on their roofs. So the next renewable source that is a major source of power is wind energy. When you think of wind energy, you might think of the old-fashioned windmills sitting on farms out in the country, but wind power has come a very long way since those days. Now, wind turbines are as big as skyscrapers, with huge turbines that turn an electric generator and produce electricity. So the pros of wind power are that it is relatively cheap because wind is free, and when those wind turbine farms are put in top wind states like California, Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, and Iowa. Also, the land that wind turbines can be used for both wind turbines and cattle or crops. So it doubles. You're basically killing two birds with one stone. But a few cons to this are that many people don't like the look of these wind turbines, and many people have also brought up the fact that they can be a threat to wildlife in the area, like birds and other flying creatures. So, in addition, just like solar panels, the production and setting up of wind turbines can be extremely expensive and require a lot of maintenance. So, now that we've touched on two of the major sources of renewable energy, let's discuss the many different non renewable sources of energy which can include crude oil, natural gas, coal, and nuclear energy. So first, let's discuss crude oil, which also can be known as petroleum. Crude oil is a mixture of hydrocarbons that are formed from plants and animals which lived millions of years ago. So therefore, crude oil is a fossil fuel and exists in liquid form in underground pools. It's drilled for and exists only in certain parts of the world. Crude oil does have some pros. Oil energy is the foundation of renewable energy. So solar power and wind power are available because of oil energy technologies. Also, oil energy is relatively cheap because the innovations behind this technology used to drill and produce this oil is so advanced. Oil is consistently reliable and also creates millions of jobs worldwide. According to Vitana.org, about 14% of the total job creation that occurred in the U.S. from 2016 to 2017 occurred in oil energy. However, crude oil does have some serious cons, the first being that crude oil is not renewable, aka it is a finite source. When it runs out, there may not be any more. Also, oil energy has very high levels of pollution. From oil spills to the emissions created from the use of crude oil, it is not environmentally friendly at all. In addition, although crude oil creates many jobs, these jobs are not necessarily safe. The working conditions can be very dangerous, and many fatalities have occurred to those working in the oil industry. So the next non-renewable energy source we will discuss is natural gas. Natural gas is like crude oil, so it's a fossil fuel, which consists of methane and other hydrocarbons that exist underground in large amounts. Natural gas is a bit of a controversial energy source because there are many pros and cons, and many people have differing views as to whether it is a good energy source or not. First of all, on the pro side, natural gas is abundant and there are many taps still available to recover this fuel. Also, compared to fuels such as coal, natural gas is considered to be relatively clean because the amount of CO2 that is emitted from the production of energy is about half of that of coal. Natural gas is also relatively cheap, but like crude oil, it's a big employer in the U.S. So also like crude oil, natural gas plays a big part in making renewable energy possible and available. However, there are also many cons to natural gas. Natural gas in and itself is a very powerful greenhouse gas. According to EPA, it's the second most prevalent greenhouse gas behind CO2, and in 2014 it accounted for about 11% of all greenhouse gas emissions from human activities. In addition, as I pointed out earlier, natural gas is a non-renewable resource, so once it's gone, there's no more, or it won't be produced for millions of years long after we need it. So in addition, the process of fracking, which is a common way to extract the gas, has many environmental concerns. It's been linked to causing earthquakes and requires a very large amount of water mixed with chemicals to bring out that gas, and those are poisoning groundwater and producing not good effects. So the next non-renewable energy source I will discuss is coal. So coal, just like the kind you get from Santa when you're not good, is a combustible rock made of carbonized plant matter that can be found in underground deposits, so just as you would have imagined it. One of the main advantages of coal is that it is found in a very large supply. So there's a large supply that's already been mined, and then there's about an estimated 1 trillion ton of coal that's still available, according to Vitana.org. So like many of the other non-renewable sources, coal is relatively cheap and easily accessible. Also, thanks to new technologies, the emissions that are emitted from coal energy are only about half as much as they used to be. On the other hand, the mining of coal energy destroys natural habitats that should be left untouched. Once again, coal is non-renewable, so when it runs out, there won't be any more. And the technology that allows coal to be partially clean is extremely expensive. In addition, the environmental toxins and emissions created from coal-burning power plants are deadly to both the environment and human beings. Last but not least, nuclear energy is the last major non-renewable energy source that we will be discussing. So NEI.org states that nuclear energy is produced from the splitting of atoms in a reactor, which heats water into steam, turns a turbine, and then generates electricity. Nuclear energy seems to be a great source of energy because it provides more energy with less fuel than fossil fuels, for example, which require a lot of fuel with minimal energy output. The cost of operating nuclear power plants have also significantly been reduced as new technologies have emerged, so they are much cheaper to operate than a coal or natural gas power plant. However, nuclear energy can be very dangerous because accidents are possible and have occurred. The radioactive repercussions of these accidents and the nuclear waste produced as a result of the fission can be deadly to the environment and the people living around these power plants. So, in addition, many renewable sources are distributed via decentralized energy sources, which means that the energy is produced near where it will be used, such as solar panels on the roofs of houses or wind turbines that will produce energy for surrounding communities. In contrast, non-renewable energy is often produced via centralized energy systems because fossil fuels, coal, and nuclear fission energy must be produced in centralized large power plants and is then distributed across power grids to multiple destinations. So, now that we've gone through all that, in conclusion, there are so many different sources of energy that can be used, both renewable and non-renewable. And as you can see, they both have varying pros and cons. In my opinion, although renewable energy can be more expensive and difficult to maintain, I think the short-term and more importantly long-term effects of using renewable energy far outweigh the few advantages of non-renewable energy like fossil fuels. I think the government should provide more money to renewable energy sources and push more to provide awareness of the horrible effects of non-renewable energy. In addition, because I know that non-renewable energy will probably always be used and because it does have a few advantages, I think there should be stricter rules and guidelines for the production of this energy and the detrimental effects that they're having on our world. Thanks so much.